The Washington Commanders earned a B for their offseason grade so far from Sports Illustrated. I'm going to tell you why that grade checks out, but also how it could even get better. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Commanders fans of the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. Please subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast so you always get the latest episodes when they drop. I'm David Harrison, credential member of the media covering your Washington Commanders for Commander Country, part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. You can find me there, here, or on Twitter at dharrison82 or anytime through text at 202-760-2644. Thank you for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen or view today and every day. Today, we're talking about an interesting option for who might replace Ron Rivera as the head coach of the Washington Commanders if the new ownership group decides to clean house. 3 interesting trade prospects, trade ideas for the NFL draft presented to us by Bleacher Report. But first, we're talking about the Washington Commanders getting a B, why that grade fits, and where it can get even better. Starting off with Sports Illustrated's Matt Verderami recently took on the task of grading all 32 NFL teams following this first portion of the NFL league year. Wave 1 of free agency, franchise tags, all of that stuff happening. And the Washington Commanders got a B from SI's writer. Matt wrote, quote, "It was an offseason of canceling out losses for the Commanders. While Schweitzer and Heineke left, they were replaced by similar players in Brissett and Gates. The addition of Wiley is a smart one, giving Washington a solid right tackle. Regardless, the Commanders have to find more contributors on both sides of the ball to be a playoff contender." End quote. That's what Matt wrote. So here's where we're going to take a look at this. Matt basically saying that the Washington Commanders spent this offseason canceling out their losses. So I thought what we would do here is we would drop a little bit of a list of the Washington Commanders losses and the Washington Commanders additions so far throughout this offseason. And when we do that, basically what I'm calling this is the Washington Commanders offseason depth rotations, right? And the reason I went with that term is because you're going to see some familiar names here in the in category, which means they're not necessarily new additions to the roster, right? But they're going to be playing presumably in different positions than they were prior to this offseason. Therefore, they're rotating into spots on the depth chart, and there are players who are then rotating out of spots on the depth chart. And these are all completed transactions here for the Washington Commanders this offseason. Starting with the very top of the list, we're starting at quarterbacks, right? Quarterback Carson Wentz, obviously out of the mix here with the Washington Commanders. In his place is quarterback Sam Howell. Like I said, not all of these moves are going to be new players added to the team, but I do feel like when you look at the Washington Commanders offseason and how they've done so far, you have to look at really the impact on the depth chart. Sam Howell in at quarterback number 1, Carson Wentz out. That to me is an improvement. Quarterback Taylor Heineke, the backup quarterback, out of the rotation here for the Washington Commanders depth chart. In his place, veteran Jacoby Brissett. Now for me, I'm actually going to give that a little bit of a push. I'm going to call that even. Taylor Heineke's got some talent, but his biggest impact obviously has been inspiration, leadership in the locker room, all of those things. Jacoby Brissett, the more veteran quarterback of the two, brings the experience. And I think the more well-rounded quarterback skill set toolbox, so to speak. So I think you give it a push on that one. Offensive tackle, this is where things get a little bit interesting. Out at offensive tackle, Sam Cosmi. And again, this is not confirmed by the team. This is just me reading the tea leaves. I think Sam Cosmi kicking inside to guard starting next season. So Sam Cosmi out at tackle. In is Andrew Wiley. And I do think that's an upgrade from an experience standpoint. Obviously, Wiley knows Eric Bieniemy, understands what his offense is going to ask for from an offensive tackle, and I do think that is an upgrade there for that reason. Out at offensive tackle, nobody. In, Trent Scott. And we talked to Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast, who told us that Trent Scott, his ceiling here, probably swing tackle. That's fine. You add another swing tackle to Cornelius Lucas, so you're not really losing any backup tackles here, but you do add Trent Scott. Obviously, that's going to be a gain and an improvement. Out at center, Nick Martin. In at center, Nick Gates. And I do view that as an obvious upgrade at that position. Out at guard, Trey Turner. In, Sam Cosmi. Sam Cosmi leaves the tackle spot, but he comes in at guard while Trey Turner, yet to be re-signed, is out at this moment on the depth chart. So Sam Cosmi rotating in for Trey Turner. I view that as an upgrade as well. Defensive end, nobody leaving right now. Abdullah Anderson coming in, free agent from the Atlanta Falcons. That's a plus. Defensive back, Bobby McCain on his way out. Danny Johnson re-signing with the team. He's the guy rotating into that Bobby McCain role that I'm seeing it late in the season. Bobby McCain really more of a nickel corner. I think Danny Johnson fills that slot. And I think, to me, that's a little bit of a push. I think Bobby McCain, obviously from a leadership standpoint, kind of has it. But I think on the field last year, really, whether it was Danny, whether it was Bobby, I think you got a lot of the same type of production. Danny Johnson maybe building on some confidence, another year in the system. I think maybe he can take a step forward even, and maybe even eclipse Bobby McCain. But I think, period, right now it's basically a push is what I'm calling it. Middle linebacker, Cole Holcomb out. He joins the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cody Barton from the Seattle Seahawks comes in. I view that as the only downgrade on this list right now. So when you look at this list up front, there are 9 total depth chart rotations that have kind of solidified. Again, guys coming out from the depth chart last year, guys coming into the depth chart this year. Not all of them are signed players. Some of them are players that were already on the roster. They're elevating, like, again, Sam Howell into the number 1 quarterback spot, at least to start OTAs and mini camps, right? And then training camp. So if you look at the depth chart rotations, right now we have 9 confirmed depth chart rotations for the Washington Commanders. In my eyes, 6 of them are upgrades. 2 of them are pushes, right? Danny Johnson and replacing Bobby McCain, to me, is a push right now. Jacoby Brissett replacing Taylor Heineke is also a push. So if you take those 2 and you add those 2 halves into 1, then you've got 7 of 9. That is a 78% depth chart rotation improvement, according to my fun little math here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. That's right on the cusp of a B, right? So I think Matt got it pretty much right there. Now, if Jacoby proves to be a better number 2 quarterback than Taylor Heineke, then that's a win. And if Danny Johnson can come in and be a better slot corner, nickel corner than Bobby McCain was, and you could even argue if he's the same, but for a better price and better cap situation, then maybe that's a win all by itself. Then you could reach as high as 89%. And I mean, hey, look, if Cody Barton comes in and sets the world on fire as an off-ball linebacker for the Washington Commanders, then you're 100% for 100%. Now, the project's obviously incomplete. Offseason's still going on. The draft still has to go on. We've got some depth chart rotations out that have yet to be replaced, right? Wes Schweitzer is out. Interior depth offensive lineman. Maybe Chris Paul steps into that position, though I'm not 100% certain. So I'm not quite sure, ready to say that is the replacement. Therefore, there's no opinion on that. Wes Martin also out. So you got 2 interior offensive linemen that have to be replaced again, perhaps in-house with Chris Paul for one of them, but Chris Paul can't be both of them. J.D. McKissick and Jarrett Patterson gone from the running back room. Jonathan Williams is back. I don't know that Jonathan Williams really steps into that J.D. McKissick role. Maybe Jarrett Patterson and Jonathan Williams are kind of one in the same in that situation. Cam Sims is gone, so you need another depth receiver. Eli Wolf, practice squad tight end. Not really sure how much that really impacts the grade. And then off-ball linebacker John Bostic, a veteran, very smart player. So you need another depth linebacker behind Cody Barton, Jamin Davis, David Mayo. Perhaps Khaleke Hudson fully steps up into that role. Perhaps Commanders decide to go in the draft. So that's kind of why I left that one as an incomplete. Not really sure who's going to be that kind of 4th linebacker for the Washington Commanders. So again, SI gives the Commanders a B so far. I think that math pretty much works out. By the way, the Cowboys and Eagles both got C's. The Giants got a B-. So if you're talking about winning the offseason, right now the Commanders look like they're coming out ahead in the NFC East. Of course, we don't know how much that's going to impact the future, but we do know the NFL draft is coming up. Huge impact on the future. Draft trades happen every single year. The Commanders executed a draft trade last year. Turned out to work out beautifully for the Washington Commanders. Could they execute another one here this year? Bleacher Report has 3 ideas. We're going to bring those to you next here on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do so today on Locked On Commanders thanks to Built Bar. You got to try Built Bars if you haven't already. The best protein bar on the market. So amazingly delicious. You won't think they're good for you, but they are. All Built Bars, all Built Puffs are high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% chocolate. It's the candy bar that is so good for you. Right now, when you head to Built.com, you'll find the amazing Snickerdoodle Chunk Puff Bar while it lasts. And if you're gluten sensitive, the Brownie Batter Puff is now gluten-free. If you can't pick one flavor, get a mixed box of 12 bars or 12 puffs and try as many as you can. And if you just can't wait long enough for the mail to arrive, head down to your local Walmart or your Sam's Club and grab yourself a box at either of those locations. However you want to get it, you can have it. And the best part is it's actually good for you. And that's why you got to try Built Bar. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view of the day. More NFL draft speculation. It is April. The NFL draft is happening this month, so we're going to get a ton of speculation, rumor, and we might even get a few moves along the way. This time, the speculation is coming to us courtesy of Jake Rill over at Bleacher Report, who took it upon himself to come up with 3 potential draft trade scenarios involving the Washington Commanders for the Washington Commanders to make the quote-unquote splash that so many teams love to make. So we're going to take a look at all 3 of these scenarios, and I'm going to tell you at the end which one is my favorite. If you have a favorite, drop your favorite in the comments here on YouTube. If you're watching, if you're listening, hit me up on email, hit me up on Twitter, let me know which scenario you would go with if you were presented these 3 options and you were in charge of the Washington Commanders. So let's start with scenario number 1. This scenario I'm titling Get the Franchise Quarterback. Scenario number 1 has the Washington Commanders trading with the Atlanta Falcons. In the trade, the Washington Commanders get the 8th overall pick from the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons, meanwhile, get the number 16th pick in the first round. They get Washington's number 47th pick, which is in the second round, and then the 193rd pick, which comes in the 6th round. So why is this draft option good for the Washington Commanders? Well, if you're drafting based on what you know that Sam Howell has potential. You know that Jacoby Brissett has never been a long-term starter anywhere in the National Football League. And you know that Jake Fromm, solid dude, probably not going to be a franchise quarterback at this point in time. So if that's what you know, then you don't really know that you have a franchise quarterback. So you could go into it and say, we need to try to get our franchise quarterback here. Now, if Howell works out, quarterbacks can always be flipped for future draft capital as long as you control the narrative. Now, if this draft pick, if it's Anthony Richardson or anybody else, goes out there and just looks really bad in 2 or 3 preseasons, and then you try to trade him, you're probably getting a 4th round pick for him, right? But if he goes out there and looks good, if you put him in a situation to succeed, make him look good with play calling, scheme design, all that stuff, maybe you flip that former 1st round pick. I don't know if you get a 1st round pick for him, but maybe you get a 2nd, maybe you get a 3rd, maybe you package a late round pick and you move him up into the 2nd. Either way, possible to get a return on your investment, even if you don't necessarily end up starting that quarterback. So the final thing, why this kind of works, you get multiple chances to get a franchise quarterback, right? And every NFL team, if they get the opportunity to get multiple chances at landing a franchise quarterback, is likely going to take it. Now, why don't I like this trade? Honestly, it's the old adage. If you got 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Well, if you have 3 quarterbacks, then you got what, negative -1 quarterbacks. I mean, you already have Sam Howell, you already have Jacoby Brissett. You're already kind of committed and tied into this competition. If you're the Washington Commanders, better to go out, let these people compete, and let them and go from there. And if you don't have a franchise quarterback at the end of this season, if you're Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew, unfortunately, it probably means that you're also out of a job. But for the Washington Commanders, from a franchise standpoint, if I'm an owner having to quote unquote approve or not approve a move up of this caliber, I'm going to hold those picks, because you trade all these picks, again, your 1st, your 2nd rounder, you get your quarterback, but you're not back on the clock till number 97 without another trade. And if you're trading up, then you got to send even more picks and draft capital from the future to trade back up. You're not getting any offensive line help in the 1st, 2nd round. You're not getting a cornerback in the 1st, 2nd round. And now that you have a 1st round quarterback, number 8 overall pick, the second Sam Howell starts to struggle a little bit, the second Jacoby Brissett starts to struggle a little bit, what's going to happen? We're all going to start asking, when is that number 8 overall pick going to step onto the field? Now you're going to have not 1, but 2 quarterbacks out there looking over their shoulder. And trust me, I've had many conversations with NFL quarterbacks, college quarterbacks even, about this very topic, playing with someone looking over your shoulder and thinking every single play, if this is the bad snap, I might get benched. That is not a healthy way for a quarterback to go out there and operate. Pressure is good, but that kind of pressure, that's going to make just about every quarterback crumble. So that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, I call the hunt and gather scenario. And in this trade scenario, we see the Washington Commanders trade back. And you already know I'm team trade back, right? Commanders get number 31. They get number 63 in the 2nd round. They get number 166 in the 5th round. And the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs get number 16 and number 233 in the 7th round. So why is this scenario a good scenario? You get more draft picks, more opportunities to add talented players. You still have solid offensive line talent available at number 31 potentially. guys like Florida guard Osiris Torrance, Ohio State tackle DeJuan Jones, if you want to go that direction, or you still have solid cornerback talent available at number 31. Mississippi State cornerback Emmanuel Forbes, for example, is possibly a guy who will be available there at number 31. Looking ahead to number 63, honestly, that 63rd pick that you got from the Kansas City Chiefs in this trade, that is a prime spot potentially to land yourself a third running back to add to Brian Robinson, add to Antonio Gibson. UCLA's Zach Charbonnet could be there. Texas A&M's Devon Achane could be there, and UAB's Dwayne McBride could also be options there. Now, why doesn't this trade potentially work? Well, because you're moving back a lot. Going back from 16 to 31, you might have 2 or 3 players that you're saying, look, at 31, if one of these 2 or 3 guys is still available, then we're okay with taking that guy. But that's a lot of picks. That is about half the first round that you got to wait now to make a pick. And that guy could get scooped by someone else. That's always a threat to potentially happen. So, and of course, you can't control the board the rest of the way down there. I say that number 63 could be a prime spot for running backs. They could all be gone by 60, and you're left at 63 with, I don't know, a lot of players that you probably didn't have targeted. So there's always that risk, right? But I think the options and the availability to potentially get better players is still there, even if, say, the running back group gets depleted before you come back around to number 63. And if you're really that worried about it, draft a running back at 47 and just deal with the backlash that comes in. So this third scenario, and this is where things get really interesting here. This is the trade Montez Sweat scenario. And I think for the next 23 days or so, we're going to get a lot of speculation. And until the Washington Commanders make a decision on Chase Young's 5th-year option, which they don't even have to make till after the NFL draft, according to the deadline, we're going to see more and more of this. I think Montez Sweat in a contract year does not have an extension yet. Everybody's looking to draw on pay money, saying, how are you going to pay Montez Sweat? But they want to keep Chase Young. Those same people say the Commanders should pick up Chase Young's 5th-year option, which is a guaranteed $17 million plus, in lieu of re-signing Montez Sweat, whose salary cap number you could potentially flex out, adjust in bonuses and all these fancy cap things that people do to account for $10, $11 million next year. So anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But in this trade proposal, again, by Jake Rill over at Bleacher Report, the Commanders get pick number 53. They get pick number 148, a 2nd rounder, a 5th rounder, and the Chicago Bears get Montez Sweat in a contract year. Obviously, they're going to basically give him a contract extension. They're going to sign him out for 3, 4, however many years it is, and they get another contributor to the defense that is very, very well overhauled this offseason for the Chicago Bears. So why does this trade potentially make sense? Obviously, you get more picks. Why is it a bad idea? You already know that if you ask me, if you've been listening to the show, you already know if you're taking Chase Young or you're taking Montez Sweat. To me, you're taking Montez Sweat. You're taking the guy that's been on the field longer, contributed more, because doing this, you now have 2 big question marks at edge. You've got Chase Young, that's a big question mark, and you've got a rookie that you might know what you think he's going to become, but that doesn't mean he's going to become what you think he's going to become. So now, instead of having 1 question mark in Chase Young and you having a constant and a steady guy in Montez Sweat, now you've got 2 question marks because you made this trade. Basically have to pick up Chase Young's 5th-year option at this point. If you trade away Montez Sweat, you've got to commit to Chase Young for at least a 5th year. Now you're locked in at $17 million plus against salary cap. And now you got to consider edge in the 1st round. And we're talking about potentially adding another 1st-round pick to this defensive line that already has the most NFL salary cap amount dedicated to it among compared to every other NFL team out there. To me, that's ridiculous. So which option would I go to? I'm sure you know already. I'm going scenario 2. I'm going with the trade back. Hunt for a good trade partner, gather those draft picks. I like this one. You trade 31, or you trade 16 rather, and a 7th rounder, you get a 1st, you get a 2nd, and you get a 5th rounder, and you go to work filling out the rest of your roster. So that's the route I'm going. Again, good scenarios presented by Jake Rill of Bleacher Report. These mock scenarios are meant to spark discussion. And as soon as I saw these 3, I was like, we got to talk about this on the show. So it definitely was effective. Let me know which one you think is the best option. Let me know which one you would go with out of those 3 options. Coming up next, Mike Florio presented an interesting name for an idea of who might replace Ron Rivera if the new ownership group decides to clean house after the 2023 NFL season. Who that person is, what I think about it, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. an interesting thing happens to a very successful NFL franchise over the last 20 plus years. And Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, took that and turned it into a whole other conversation that we're about to get involved with here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, talking about New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft, essentially putting Bill Belichick on the hot seat, talking about that if the Patriots don't make it back to the playoffs this coming season, it would be 3 out of the last 4 seasons they missed the playoffs. That could put Bill Belichick on the hot seat, and that is an interesting prospect to think about, Bill Belichick being on the hot seat in New England less than 5 years after Tom Brady decided to walk away from New England, went down to Tampa, played 3 years, won a Super Bowl, ultimately decided to retire this offseason. And what Florio did was kind of dove into and said, okay, if Bill Belichick decided he still wanted to coach, a lot of coaches, they do this, they take a year off, maybe they do some TV, and then they eventually come back. Bill Belichick's been coaching for a long, long time. So if he's not ready to hang it up and just go fishing or whatever he likes doing in his off time for the rest of his life and wants to coach again, what are the scenarios, what are the teams that would fit the scenario that Bill Belichick would be looking for? Well, Florio talks about how Belichick was going to want control, and I think that's a very easy thing to kind of discern. Belichick has a lot of control in New England, controls the roster, draft picks, free agents, re-signings, all that stuff. So in essence, no sitting GM who has roster control is going to hire him, because if you do, you're essentially going to give up your own roster control. So you can take all those teams out that have a sitting GM who's not on the hot seat and isn't potentially looking for a new head coach, which basically leaves you with a list of teams, according to Florio, that includes the Dallas Cowboys, the Cleveland Browns, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Buffalo Bills, and the Washington Commanders. Now, these are all very interesting ideas. Talking about the Washington Commanders specifically, obviously with the new ownership group coming in, the question is being asked and asked and asked time and time again about whether or not they're going to want to clean house, start fresh, get rid of everybody associated with the Dan Snyder era, even the guys, Martin Mayhew, Jason Wright, Ron Rivera, who were brought in to essentially help manage the mess and control the damage done by all the Dan Snyder accusations and things going on and his actions with avoiding everything and just craziness. And that, honestly, that approach, if they go that way, makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint. You don't want that image following you as long as you can. So again, you come in, it's a clean sweep. Everybody who is forward facing for the organization during that tumultuous time, thank you for your service. Good luck with your future. We're going to move on. So you could see the Washington Commanders potentially doing that, because if you're getting rid of Ron Rivera, you're also getting rid of Martin Mayhew, Marty Herney, all those guys who are essentially starting from scratch. You bring in Bill Belichick. He's one hire in two. He's your head coach and he's your GM. And he's going to bring a coaching staff everywhere he goes or every season. I mean, you got coaches that leave New England and then come back to New England to work for him again. I mean, he's bringing a coaching staff that quite honestly has had a lot of success over the last 2 decades plus. So that makes a lot of sense. For the Dallas Cowboys, I mean, Jerry Jones bringing in Bill Belichick after firing Mike McCarthy, I could see that happening very easily. The Cleveland Browns, I'm not so sure Belichick honestly would want to kind of take on the story that is Deshaun Watson and the amount of control that Deshaun Watson has with that fully guaranteed contract. Not sure that's really in Bill Belichick's wheelhouse. The Chargers are an interesting scenario because of the quarterback, Justin Herbert. I think it's kind of a Belichick-type quarterback situation there. The Bucs are interesting. I can get a lot into the Buccaneers. I might talk about this on Locked On Bucs, actually. So if you want to hear more about the Buccaneers side of things, check out Locked On Bucs on our Thursday episode, and maybe this will be one of those topics there. The Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Bills had some struggles, right? They've gotten to the playoffs, they've gotten to the championship game in the AFC, and then they just kind of fail to capitalize. And I get all that, but I don't know that I would think that Sean McDermott is necessarily on the hot seat. But if he is on the hot seat and it doesn't make it work and the Bills fire him, I mean, Bill Belichick, after all the years, he tormented the Buffalo Bills in New England. To go from New England to Buffalo as a head coach and having a quarterback like Josh Allen, that would be very interesting. So some interesting scenarios there from Florio. And again, this is speculation, kind of looking ahead, but it's very interesting. And then it has the Washington Commanders on there for a very good reason, I think. Now, who are the top 3? Obviously, I think the Washington Commanders kind of work out, but honestly, my top 3, I'm going to start with the Dallas Cowboys. I think this is a Jerry Jones type move, and Bill Belichick's age isn't really going to concern Jerry Jones, because if this scenario unfolds, you're basically looking to get the best out of Dak Prescott you can before that situation is probably over and done with. And Jerry Jones is trying to get a Super Bowl ring, guys. He's not worried about the next 20 years of the Dallas Cowboys. He's trying to get a ring now. So I think the Dallas Cowboys probably number 1 on that list. I think the Chargers are next. Again, the Justin Herbert attraction, the solid defense, young quarterback, strong defense. It's basically what happened in New England when Tom Brady came in. I think that's an attractive option for Bill Belichick. And then the third option that I'm going to put in my top three is retirement for a year. Whether it's TV, whether it's fishing, it's retiring from coaching for a year and then coming back in 2025 and seeing what the lay of the land looks like. Look, if the Commanders clean house, I think they're more than likely to follow market trend. Again, you're talking about a new owner, a business person, coming in. I think they're more likely to follow the market trend, which is going after the next young, hot NFL head coach. Typically, teams also like to flip from a defensive guy to an offensive guy, offense to defense. A lot of times you don't see NFL teams go offensive-minded head coach to offensive-minded head coach. They typically like to kind of flip the script on that. So the numbers in the NFL say that offensive head coaches actually have more success as far as postseason appearances, wins, Super Bowls, all that stuff, compared to defensive head coaches. So who are the three right now in April of 2023 that I would say are probably most likely to be the prime candidates to replace Ron Rivera if this scenario unfolds? I got to go Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, the Bengals offensive coordinator, and then Kellen Moore, the Chargers offensive coordinator, especially if Belichick goes to Los Angeles, takes over the Chargers. Maybe he brings in his own guys. Kellen Moore comes out, one of the bright young minds in the NFL, potentially comes back to the NFC East as a very young potential head coach candidate for the Washington Commanders. And, of course, Eric Bieniemy's name is going to be in there. But if he's getting head coach buzz elsewhere and you're cleaning house, if you're Washington, maybe you take a gamble. You let him walk. You get 2 third-round picks for your new coach and your new team to take a new direction with as well. So interesting conversation from Mike Florio. Figured we kind of expand on it here a little bit on the program. Hopefully you enjoy that. Let me know what you think about Bill Belichick potentially becoming that new coach. You think that's in the cards? Do you think that's a little outlandish? Or these other guys, Kafka, Callahan, Moore, EB, you know what I mean? Let me know what you think of any of the guys potentially taking over if Ron Rivera is fired at the end of the season. I want to thank you in the meantime for checking out Locked On Commanders, for making this show your first view or your first listen of the day. For your next one, please check out Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I will be back Wednesday afternoon live for a mailbag episode. So if you haven't already, get your questions and your mock drafts in. And there's also a little time left still to answer my draft question that I proposed on last week's end of week episode. If there's one player you would want to see the Washington Commanders trade up for on day one of the NFL draft, who would that be and why? We're going to go over some of those answers at the end of the week, and I'll give you another question. I want the fan take on these questions heading into the weekend. So send in your questions, mock drafts, your answers to my question of the week via email at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com or Twitter at dharrison82 or in the YouTube comments, or you can text them to me at 202-760-2644. Signing off for today, I'm David Harrison, staff writer for Commander Country, part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, credential member of the media covering your Washington Commanders, more importantly, hanging out with you every single day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.